Everyone thinks love has to be loud, dramatic, unforgettable. But what if the strongest love is the one nobody notices? On an ordinary afternoon, Keanu Reeves witnessed something so quiet, so simple, that it completely changed how he understood love forever. And once you hear this story, you'll never see love the same way again. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Now, let's dive into what really happened. It wasn't a dramatic confession. There was no music rising in the background, no crowd holding its breath, no grand speech meant to be remembered forever. Nothing about this moment looked important. And that's exactly why it mattered. It was a quiet afternoon, one of those simple moments the world usually ignores. The kind that passes without headlines or cameras. Keanu Reeves sat alone on a plain wooden bench in a small city park, dressed simply, blending into the everyday rhythm of life. People walked past him without a second glance. No fans asking for photos. No interviews waiting. Just ordinary life moving gently around him. The air was calm. A soft breeze brushed through the trees, causing the leaves to rustle quietly. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then went silent. Sunlight filtered softly through the branches, warming the ground and everything it touched. Time felt slower here, as if the world had decided to pause for a moment. For most of his life, Keanu had lived in noise. Bright lights. Movie sets filled with voices. Endless interviews. Applause that followed him wherever he went. Fame had become a constant companion, always present, always demanding. It followed him like a shadow, sometimes exciting, sometimes exhausting. But sitting there on that bench, he felt something different. Something rare. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from escaping the world, but the kind that comes from quietly being part of it. No expectations. No roles to play. Just presence. As his eyes drifted across the park, he noticed an elderly couple walking slowly along the path. Their steps were careful, unhurried. Their hands were gently intertwined. They weren't talking. They weren't smiling for anyone. They weren't trying to be seen. They were simply together. There was something deeply honest about them. Their love didn't demand attention. It didn't need proof. It didn't announce itself. It existed comfortably in silence. Watching them, something stirred inside Keanu, a feeling he couldn't immediately name. A realization began to take shape, quietly and naturally, just like the moment itself. In that simple scene, he began to understand something he had never truly seen before. Love didn't have to be loud to be real. And that quiet truth would change how he understood love forever. From the outside, Keanu Reeves' life looked extraordinary. Blockbuster films, global recognition, red carpets, and millions of admirers around the world. To most people, his life seemed like a dream, filled with excitement, admiration, and endless passion. It was easy to assume that someone living under bright lights must also live with constant happiness. But behind the scenes, the reality was quieter, and often heavier. The noise never stopped. Movie premieres were loud, crowded, and glamorous, yet they often felt strangely empty. Conversations flowed endlessly, but many of them stayed on the surface. Smiles were exchanged, hands were shaken, and words were spoken, but meaning was rare. Everything moved fast, and very little felt real. Relationships were no different. Love, when mixed with fame, came with pressure. Expectations were high. Every moment felt observed. Every emotion felt examined. Instead of comfort, love often arrived with demands, attention, explanations, appearances, and drama. Over time, these relationships burned out, not because love was missing, but because peace was. With each experience, Keanu slowly learned to protect himself. He didn't harden, he simplified. He began to speak less and listen more. He avoided crowds when he could and kept his circle small. Not because he disliked people, but because he valued sincerity. Silence became safer than noise. Presence became more meaningful than performance. To the outside world, his quiet nature was often misunderstood. Some saw it as sadness. Others called it distance. But the truth was deeper than that. Keanu wasn't running away from life, he was searching within it. Searching for something that felt honest. Something that didn't disappear when the lights went out. He wasn't looking for louder love or bigger moments. He wasn't chasing applause. He was searching for something real, something that didn't need to be explained or proven. And as he sat on that park bench, watching ordinary life unfold without expectations or cameras, it finally began to make sense. Love had always felt heavy because it had been surrounded by noise. Fame had wrapped it in pressure. Attention had drained it of peace. In that quiet moment, he began to understand that maybe love wasn't meant to compete with the world. Maybe it was meant to exist quietly within it. The elderly couple returned, slowly making their way to a nearby bench not far from where Keanu was sitting. They carried a small takeaway coffee, holding it carefully as if it was something delicate. They didn't speak loudly, and there were no exaggerated smiles or gestures meant to impress anyone. Everything about them was quiet, ordinary, but somehow profoundly beautiful. They simply existed in the moment, fully present with each other. Keanu watched, captivated by the subtle details. The way the man gently adjusted the woman's scarf when it slipped, not saying a word, not drawing attention to himself. The way she leaned in just slightly, naturally, without any thought to appearances or who might be watching. Their eyes met occasionally, calm and steady, without need for dramatics or declarations. It wasn't about being noticed. It wasn't about proving anything. It was simply about being together. And that's when the realization struck him. Love didn't need to be loud to be powerful. It didn't need grand gestures or public approval to be real. Love could exist quietly, without fanfare, and still have the ability to transform a life. In that calm, unassuming scene, Keanu felt a shift inside himself, a softening he hadn't known he needed. The weight of years spent chasing expectations, navigating pressure, and living in the constant glare of fame began to lift, almost imperceptibly at first, then more clearly. He understood something crucial. The love he had been seeking wasn't missing. It had always existed, but not in the forms the world celebrated. Flashy moments, dramatic confessions, or attention-seeking displays. Real love, the kind that lasts, often thrives quietly, hidden in small acts of care, presence, and patience. Quiet love wasn't weak, it was enduring. It was strong enough to survive time, to weather life's storms, and to remain steadfast without seeking recognition. Watching the couple share their coffee, calmly and tenderly, Keanu realized that he had been taught the wrong lesson about love his whole life. Love didn't need to shout. It didn't need to be spectacular to be meaningful. In that silent afternoon, surrounded by ordinary life and simple gestures, he felt a profound clarity. Some of the most powerful emotions in the world, he realized, exist in silence. And that understanding would change the way he approached relationships, connection, and even himself, for the rest of his life. From that day on, something had shifted inside Keanu Reeves. Life, which had once felt overwhelming with noise, expectations, and constant performance, began to appear differently. He noticed details he had once overlooked, the small, quiet acts that spoke volumes without drawing attention. For example, a barista at a local cafe would remember a customer's name, greet them with a genuine smile, and hand them their drink with care. A friend would sit beside him during difficult moments, offering silence instead of advice, presence instead of judgment. These small gestures, subtle and unassuming, carried a kind of love he had never fully appreciated before. Kindness, he realized, often whispered rather than shouted. Keanu came to understand that love wasn't always about passion, intensity, or grand declarations. Sometimes, love was about creating safety for someone. Sometimes it was about choosing to stay, even when it wasn't convenient. Sometimes it was about understanding someone without a single word being spoken. These quiet forms of love were steady, unwavering, and deeply meaningful. This new awareness didn't make his life louder or more dramatic. In fact, it had the opposite effect. It made his world calmer. He no longer felt the need to chase perfect love, the kind depicted in movies or celebrated on social media. He no longer believed that love had to look a certain way to be real. Instead, he learned to allow space, for himself, for others, and for the relationship itself. He learned to allow silence. He learned to allow honesty. And in that space, he discovered that connections could feel deeper than ever before. Love was no longer a performance or something to prove. It wasn't measured by appearances, attention, or external validation. For the first time, love felt less like a spotlight to endure and more like a garden to protect. It was something fragile yet resilient, something to nurture quietly, without expectation or show. Keanu realized that real love thrived not in noise, not in applause, but in the quiet moments, the shared coffee, the comforting presence, the gentle understanding. In this newfound perspective, he found peace. He understood that love, at its core, is not meant to be displayed for the world to see. It is meant to be experienced, protected, and cherished in the quiet spaces of life. Years later, Keanu Reeves would still remember that quiet afternoon in the park. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it was captured on film or celebrated by the world. But because it was honest, real, and unassuming. The kind of truth that stays with you long after the noise fades. The world, of course, continues to celebrate loud love. Public proposals. Viral romance videos. Grand gestures designed to be seen and remembered. Social media thrives on the dramatic, the flashy, the instant spectacle. And for most people, love has become a performance, something to be measured by attention, likes, and applause. But Keanu had discovered something deeper, something far more enduring. The strongest love, he realized, doesn't need an audience. It doesn't require validation or recognition. It doesn't shout for attention. It simply exists. It's there in the quiet gestures, the unspoken moments, and the patient presence of someone who chooses to stay beside you even when no one is watching. It's the love that doesn't demand words, yet communicates everything. The love that feels like home rather than fireworks. The love that holds you without pressure, that comforts without needing to explain, that reassures without a crowd applauding. It doesn't rush or dramatize. It doesn't seek recognition. It endures because it is steady, gentle, and real. Keanu remembered the elderly couple on that bench, the way they shared coffee, their hands occasionally brushing, the silent understanding between them. That memory became a quiet lesson in his life, a reminder that love's true strength is found in patience, presence, and consistency, not in performance or spectacle. From that day onward, Keanu saw the world differently. He valued the quiet moments. He treasured the subtle acts of kindness and connection. And he understood that the love worth holding on to isn't always the one that dazzles. It's the one that quietly stays, unwavering, over time. Love doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes, it whispers, and if you listen closely, it has the power to change your life. It can teach patience, empathy, and resilience. It can remind you that the most meaningful relationships are the ones built on trust, understanding, and the quiet commitment to simply be there for one another. That afternoon in the park became a lasting memory for Keanu, a moment that revealed the beauty of love in its purest, simplest form. And that lesson stayed with him, quietly shaping how he lived, loved, and connected with the world.